What's a podcast actually worth listening to? History of Rome. After the first few episodes where sound producerton isn't great, it's just like 200 episodes of incredible story of the rise and fall of the entire Roman Empire. The dude knows his shit. Actively will call out his own mistakes during the following episodes when he is wrong, which isn't often. He tells it in way better than any textbook. He almost never goes off the rails and talks about irrelevant material. And when he does, it's about baseball for like 4 seconds. He enjoys the topic, and you can tell. Revolutions, also by Mike Duncan, is excellent as well. Well, there's your problem. A podcast about engineering disasters, with slides. I listen to 1 or 2 comedy podcasts, but none of them make me laugh as hard or as often as 2 civil engineers from Philly, proud sons of Philly, and a posh British woman discussing engineering and societal disaster. Edit. Only Roz is a civil engineer. Liam is a finance major because he's a good boy. Great podcast. I went to school with Justin, and he was always a very funny guy with his dry sense of humor. Heard from a mutual friend he had started podcasting and figured I'd give it a listen. Probably one of the most interesting and funny podcasts out there, and I don't even know much about engineering. A little surprised that this was the top of the thread, but I absolutely agree that it's a podcast worth listening to. The Hindenburg episode is still one of the funniest things I've listened to, from the Prussia bullying to the countless accounts of Zeppelins getting caught in a gale and losing all hands. Seconded. Train good, car bad. No such thing as a fish. Funny while being somewhat educational. I've learnt a lot about Moss. My favorite thing about it is normally funny podcasts need to take time to build up to a punchline, climax, or twist, so there's often lots of exposition to set things up. No such thing as a fish has educational, fascinating fun facts for its build up to funny moments, punchlines, so it's saturated with worthwhile content from start to finish. The stuff in between the laughs isn't just setups. It's really interesting stuff. This is kind of new, but check out If Books Could Kill. 2 guys discuss and analyze best-selling non-fiction books that could use a good dissection, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad and The Secret. Well-researched and super funny and interesting. Love it. I've been listening to this as well. The episode on Freakonomics made me cringe at myself for thinking so highly of the book when it came out. The Rich Dad, Poor Dad episode was super good. I was dying laughing at some of the examples they pulled from the book, such as Make More Money by Joining and Melman. Seconding this, one of the hosts is part of another podcast called Maintenance Phase that is similarly very well researched and all about debunking and bursting myths and getting to the bottom of things. I listened to Maintenance Phase, and now every Reddit thread on the subject of physical health is excruciating to read. Edit. Predictably, I've summoned the zealots. Darknet Diaries. Cybersecurity guy here. Rissida gets a lot of things right and cares about the community. Or is his name Jackery Cider? I am obsessed with this podcast will kill you. If you like the biology and history of diseases and illnesses, this is it. The presenters are awesome. Hardcore History. The one series may be one of the best podcast series I've ever listened to, completely rocked my world and made me realize I knew nothing about that war. The Way We Won is one of the greatest pieces of media of all time. All of H is amazing, but the blueprint to Armageddon is transcendent. Hard agree. I've listened to it multiple times and have probably ruined several friendships by screaming about Verdun or Passchendaele in dinner party settings. Dan's magnum opus for sure. Am I the only one in the US who feels like they just totally skipped over this war in school? Like Revolutionary War, Civil War, Reconstruction, World War I's, big gap in between. What I always remembered being in high school in the late 90s is that they taught like 1900, present in the last chapter of a history book, and it was always like the last week of school, and we never paid attention. So much time focused on colonial America and the Civil War that by the time we got to the 20th century, it was practically skimmed through. Quote, proceeds to describe the most horrific event you ever heard, end quote. Genghis Khan did some cold-ass shit, and then he did it again, and again, and again, and then he did it again. Less a podcast, more a full-length audiobook that's released every 4-6 months. It's audio go. The History of Rome. Mike Duncan, the rest is history, hardcore history. Just wanna add revolutions from Mike Duncan if you haven't gotten around to that one yet already. That dude is an incredible historian. 99 Invisible. Behind the Bastards is fantastic, but will question humanity. You know what won't make you question humanity? The tasty feeling of some Cool Ranch Doritos on in your mouth. Doritos. Probably never directly caused a genocide. But you know who almost definitely has directly caused a genocide. The sponsors of today's show, Raytheon. Raytheon, buy yourself a knife missile. I miss those Doritos days of summer. This was the podcast that taught me about Combat General Brett Hawthorne. Take a bullet for you, babe. Ellen, Brett Hawthorne's wife, not the TV host, ends up getting blown up in the nuke attack on Air Force One. That pathetic hug with his wife when Brett Hawthorne is pretty sure he's going to die makes me seriously suspect the parentage of Ben's kid. I really want a sequel. I imagine in the sequel Brett Hawthorne and Soledad Ramirez will end up either hooking up or falling for each other. I can't imagine it happening naturally. It will be forced and clunky, just like Ben Shapiro's flirting techniques. That Henry Kissinger six-parter though. The stuff in that and the Dulles Brothers episodes should be required learning for all human. Never heard this podcast, but fuck Henry Kissinger. I just have a policy of saying that anytime he comes up. So does the host of this podcast. I knew that fuck Henry Kissinger, but listening to the podcast series on him made me realize I didn't despise him half as much as he deserved. To quote John Oliver, champagne is reserved for 3 events: weddings, New Year's, and if and when Henry Kissinger dies. I especially love the if and when, like it's not a certainty. If anyone in the world sold his soul to the devil, Kissinger is a possibility. Shh. People are gonna learn about the child hunting island that a certain food delivery service maintains. The Anthropocene Review. Want to run that by me again? I love You're Wrong About. Yup. The episode about the rugby team stranded in the Andes had me feeling every emotion. What else is there to do when rescuers are finally on their way and a young man screams avalanche but spreads everyone with a fire extinguisher, but to laugh and then cry a bit? My all-time favorite is a film reroll. They take the basic premise of a film and play through the story as an RPG, allowing the choices of the players and roll of the dice to drastically change the story. Highlights have included starting a civil war in Oz, blowing up the moon in Et, and the Gene tricking the players into thinking they were doing an obscure 80s teen sex comedy none of them had ever heard of, only to spring Jason on them and reveal it was really Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Here are a couple clips for a taste. The Cowardly Lion worries about what happened to Dorothy and Scarecrow when the party got split. Jafar fails a will roll and falls in love with Aladdin. They will sometimes do sequels to their previous re-rolls, and those can get epic. Their version of the Halloween trilogy is my personal canonical version of that franchise to me. Danny Hodges is the greatest ascended MC protagonist that movies never had. Currently, they're doing Rogue 2. In their version of Rogue, One, Andor, Jain, and Kuso all survived, so now their continued story is running parallel to A New Hope. I could go on and on about the running jokes, the great humor, the unexpectedly dramatic moments with real pathos, the wonderful personalities and absolutely world-class acting and improv that goes into the show. I dearly love it and have listened to every episode at least twice, while some of my favorites have become go to comfort listening, and I've lost count of how many times I've re-listened to those. But I'll let y'all discover all of that for yourself. It's a true gem of a show. Some honorable mentions. Oh no, Ross and Carrie, they examine fringe science, spirituality, and claims of the paranormal and show up so you don't have to. They try alternative medicines on themselves, join cults, and investigate all kind of wild claims and report back their first-hand experience. Yes, they have done Scientology. You might be surprised at how far into it they got before they were found out. Monster Talk, a show that looks at Fortean phenomenon from a skeptical perspective. Never cynical or simply debunking. They engage with every topic like there could be some merit, until they find that there isn't any. Good research, and even worse, puns. In research of a sort of spin-off for Monster Talk, they watch every episode of the classic Leonard Nimoy series, in search of and present some explanations that the producers chose not to present. One of the co-hosts is an archaeologist, and it can be a hoot to hear him go off on ancient alien and Graham Hancock type shit. Another Path, a Dead 5 actual play podcast. They had a pretty epic campaign that I'd recommend for fans of the Adventure Zone. They recently started a new one with new characters that doesn't require listening to the old one, although the old one is well worth the time. Imprinted Echoes, a Numenera actual play podcast, has some neat sci-fi concepts in it, and I love the crew playing it. This is actually happening. Each episode is about an experience someone really had and is told in their own voice. For example, one episode is about how a woman survived an apartment fire. Another is about a woman who hit and accidentally killed a person on the road. Definitely not an easy listen, but they are all important stories and experiences. Knowledge Fight. Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend is genuinely laugh out loud, funny, and often super insightful. I started out only listening to the celebrities that interested me, but then realized that Conan is such a great interviewer, he can make almost anyone interesting, so I went back and listened to them all. This is my top comedy podcast. I can't find anything that even compares. I'm mostly in it for the interactions with Sona and Matt. I've been a Conan fan for decades, but this podcast really demonstrates the full agility of his unique, brilliant mind. His interviews are thoughtful and insightful, and his curiosity takes conversations to unexpected places. But for me, the true gold is found in the intros and the outros. His ability to craft a bit on virtually any setup is unmatched. He once riffed as Richard Nixon, resigning presidency, not due to Watergate, but because he'd taken role in Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo. I'm not sure I've laughed harder at anything in the last 10 years. The podcast has solidified him for me as the sharpest comedy mind today. Someone, Sodomites, sent me a bucket of poop. Normal Gossip is hilarious, and the stories are all about low-stakes drama, fun and stress. Free, Squirrel Stories best. You need to listen to the first Timothy Oliphant, 1, and the first Jeff Goldblum. Stuff You Should Know. My Dad Wrote a Porno. The End of the World with Josh Clark is also by the guy from Sisk. Great listen, and I feel the format is better than Sisk, as it's a lot less rambling and back and forth. Dear Hanky John, hang out with John and Hank Green as they chat about random topics. Light-hearted, but can be quite eloquent at times. What's her name? Hitori Podcast on Forgotten. Hitori Podcast on Forgotten. 99 Invisible. Deep dives into random topics. Some light-hearted, some serious. Always eye-opening and thought-provoking. Podcast on Museums, Science and Storytelling. Podcast on Museums, Science and Storytelling. The Dork Forest. Guests talk about their passion. The Atlas Obscura Podcast. Podcast on random places and the people that live there. Sawbones. A marital tour of misguided medicine. It's a semi-serious look at medical history, hosted by a doctor and her comedian husband. Glad one of the McElroy podcasts are at the top. Sawbones is so good. Off Menu with Ed Gamble and James Acaster. Celebrities get to pick their dream meat. Dungeons and Daddies, if you like top comedy heavyweight, you're wrong about the Magnus Archives-ology. The Dollop. This American Life, The Moth. This, a podcast where Labradoodle Daddy Dave Anthony reads a story from American history to his nemesis, driver and man who killed his father, Gary Reynolds, who has no idea what the story is about. 60 songs that explain the 90s. It's more than 60 and got renewed. It explains the history behind a very diverse selection of songs from the decade. Distractible. This is important. If you are looking for something funny, Comedy Bang Bang is pretty great. It can be a little hit or miss, since it's an improv interview show, but when it can be incredible. The Always Sunny Podcast. Last podcast on the left. Italy is shaped like a boot. Whatâ by Horse Pics of Henry Cavill. I'll always cherish the memory of the first time I heard Henry doing the Scungily Man bit while driving home and having to pull over a block from my house cause I was laughing too hard to drive. That and the corn low. Hail yourself,